Tangazo teri karse teri ngazo derindwa karse de tije geju shirupa
Lazo.
ta tije geju shirupa te ki kare lagindula na kazon de tije geju henga pa jolangi nyans lenji ki chinda manda nomba nga yerwa tende ki chinda manda nomba nga bo te ngaron su tsala yeba la ke pache shinkingi eni ngachin rabu teso kare yinba so chea joba seya jire se tike de higindo ta kazon kong yina la parki sike chuni ki kazu la sena tong yoju do chao do nyole la ne chin ramu da chusun ji xie songwa xie zon ta teso kanga yonlang ki nyole shi ju ki taipa do zendu tenpa la soba teso ki pache res xezon ta teso pa pong shi guguris. Teso pong shi ki nimbo de kare kare yinbi kor teso eni tsike yiji shirupa de ki heyi yins naga chidu chadon tegin to leni doki shele mande ki tedara yondo yondo senpa ni di nimbo gone jab munjurse lagindo wa.
Lazo.
Xezon ta te kare lagir sidu soso ki jila ngajo le natan digi maris ngajo ye na eni yonlang ki chi nyolin shiya ngabu teso le tugi maris sena ye na le tugi maris eni yoju se yerwa ta shezon ta teso ngazo tsala mangwa jizo guru te zoya la nyimbo rabo de karikili sono tongur lawa ina eni ta pena ngaron so mesendi no la ne ri mombo tende naya yerwa na la na naya yerwa shezon naya tele sono tong shewa ina eni soso tape hiboji yinsam zubo yabo yinsam bandabo lo nyu yinsam bandabo ta tendeke gone eni ngajo shea de ungi maris ngajo shea meba chogi res tade ngune roa ta ngaron ngajo karishia yere ngala naya ni hibojindu eni nga zubo geya nindu eni nga nimaji higoya reshos teni shindoi ki kaso la soso ge tropo do penjo yidon wa duba teso do kata goya tende jire shos teni ka dedu le gewa zeye nanda me gewa zeye na ti le teki nomi te ngaron ki nyon goya tende jire shos ta teso ki kor teso yondo yon sono tong tende she gawa ina eni jonlang ki nyans lenji chubi chi ngabo te ngaron so tsa le la ke pache shinke sena la soba kondo chi chusun sheba teso eni ngaron so jila male ba chogiris eni teso ki ke pache miji ba chaw ne eni ke pache shinke te mena eni taipa dong sendru dong trenpa dong tengi zi hera teso eni ngaron so jil ye uris eni teso nyonle yabo she na eni yonlang ki toba de jil she tene rinpe yindo tonglang ki toba jil she ta tene gone eni poson soba hiboji ungi resele ta teso kola sono tongu resele eni lodo ke jabo deshe zombo la ta raja jigi yeba tene ji kogu yindo wa.
Right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to yet another session of teachings on Nagajuna's letter to a friend. So, last time we left off on verse number 45, which described there are these five sort of factors, five things to practice on the path of joining. And this next verse then describes what the obstacles are in order to gain these five factors. And before in the texts, something like 20 verses earlier, or at verse 20, there was a list starting with greed and then going on with laziness and doubt, listing 13 items, sort of
I
negative
think
factors.
12
En la
12 verses.
12. Um, so those are obstacles for the path of joining. And then this verse number 46, it describes what kind of antidote one can apply to get rid of these obstacles. And so the verse reads, I'm not beyond my karma, the deeds I've done. I'll still fall ill, age, die, and leave my friends. Think like this again and yet again, and with this remedy, avoid all arrogance. So here it's emphasizing that if we have pride in our mind stream, this is really not okay. This means that we can't practice on the path of joining. And similarly, if we have this kind of greed and hypocrisy, that also is not going to allow us to make any progress on the path. And so we need to use an antidote. And here the verse describes that we should come back to this thought that in my life, there are so many illnesses that I could fall ill with. So that's one thing, right? If we think like this, then we won't have this pride of thinking, oh, I'm such a big deal. My body's really great. I'm so healthy. We won't have that kind of pride if we really are able to take this thought to heart. This kind of pride will dissipate. It will become much less. That's really the case, actually, if you think about it. We should think that my body is going to get sick one day. My body is going to age. I'm going to get old. And then at one point, I'll die. And at that time, all of my friends, all the relatives, even my enemies, I'll have to be separated from everyone. And the result of my actions, of my karma, whether good or bad, I'll have to experience all of those. So the practice is to think like this again and again. And this helps us get rid of this kind of obstacles that hinder us from having these 5 positive factors that we practice on the path of joining. So then, if we do this and we don't have any obstacles, then these factors of faith, diligence, wisdom, meditative concentration, they will perform their function, they will do their job, and we'll be able to actually traverse the path. So this is the advice then that Nagarjuna gives to the king Dechizampo.
Kenita karse sije yeju sheden ti ta jolong ki nyas lenju chi tepa la suba chi ngabu teso ngaro zu tsala njuma shiwi ki jute la ane jiten bi yon tabi tawa se jitun jiten lende bi yon tabi tawa se tende ni yeres teso kola sono ton shigu yeres le tati kaje de ye yindwa kade torin taba ngende na yondo tala komba nitunze konza loba tawe lishe chong tanje namba memba mize dense kade karlag sedu kasi choron maon pa torido taba ta torin hla do mi kompo taba da chambe kompo tabu yona sojeji kompo tabu tinde to degi yenase tene ta kare nyole zogudlana ane ta karse go taiba do tsendu do khera la soba teso nyole shigudu teso nyole sheba la ane jiten be yon tabi tawa seyate nyole shiguris jiten be yon tabi tawa seyate karse sedu le jundre la ishi shiba te la sigiris teso ta hako guris luduk jabul lar shebarwa teso yon tabi tawa de nyole shigibi junsen te teni karse sengachi meba le jundre meba rabu tende shene loba ta she dewa ina teni ta karse go diba mige wala so mambo zo teni tende shene teni huma nomi shena tsabu tende nyo goya chogiris teni loda sengi teki geyu tsawa teso meba zogiris ani soso ge lega yabu shia teso layo pache shigiris ta tende ris shezon tende imba indu yon tabi tawa lende kola ishi shia tele dono tene lone shi udu taya te hirogi nengo dabuji chogiris le yon tende shene luduki laja jasonwa imba tende risho.
So then, verse number 47 talks about how these 5 factors, faith and so forth, that one practices on the path of joining, there's a cause for how to acquire them. This is then the authentic view, which is divided into 2 here. So the authentic worldly view and the authentic world transcending view. And here the verse reads, I'll just write it in the chat also. If higher birth and freedom is your quest, you must be accustomed to right views. Those who practice good with inverse views will yet experience terrible results. So, what does higher birth mean? What does freedom mean? Well, higher birth refers to the higher realms, such as the gods and the humans, and freedom then refers to the level of an arhat, or the level of Buddhahood. So if you desire this, if you want to reach these levels of spiritual attainment, then you have to practice faith, diligence, wisdom, and so forth. And what allows you to do that is this worldly, authentic view, which amounts to trusting karma, cause, and effect. This is something really important that we have to know. This is Nagajuna's point here. And the reason is that if we think, oh, there are no past and future lives, and there's no karma, there's no cause and effect, we'll go on to accumulate a lot of negativity based on that. And we'll have to experience really terrible results later on because of those actions. So wrong view, this kind of wrong view, it destroys our virtue, all of our merit, and it makes obstacles to practicing virtue as well. So Nagajuna's advice here is that we have to be extremely careful about this in our practice.
Konzo dembeki tendi teso ha kona ane maomba tori res tenda dembe tendi gi nelu de ha kona ane maomba soji ji kompo res teso kanga ala yon tabi tawa se res konzo ge nelu ha koa de jitembe yon tabi tawa se res tenda ge nelu ha koa de la jiten ndebi gi yon tabi tawa se res o teso la ta tono te gures Any yapo ungi res le tende keje te so he do yirita.
So mainly we can summarize it like this, that understanding the relative truth properly leads to rebirth in higher realms. Understanding the ultimate properly leads us to achieve Buddhahood. And both of these are considered the authentic view. And the first one, the relative one, is the worldly authentic view. And then the second one, the ultimate, is the world transcending authentic view. So we have to be really attentive to both of these and put them into practice correctly. And then we'll have a very good result indeed.
Ta tanda ge yon tabi tawa, jite bi yon tabi tawa don, tan tabi yon tabi tawa sin, ta jite len deba se, hedu teso nibo de, yon jo te ditir he ne ngote shi yin se la yere. Ta tino tombo, jite bi ge yon tabi tawa te jeban rabu ji he yin se le, si che yi he jeba te. Min ne yon da ni tu mide hi, me ta da me zong riba je. Tenpa nyewa maga nanjine, shinji loge tawe punto wa. Se labarwa. Ta kare sedu ngazo ge soso ge tashe ji tang na se yer, ta ngaron zo ge mi soso ge korte la. Dewandu, dungandu, karendu, jindu sanle, sono ji tang sheba ina se labari, ta sono yabonda bu ji tang sheba ina. Ani mini yonda midekin sedu, ngaron zo suina ta dewo ye mares. Kanga jojo no lunde yeres. Ta full of samsara and abo relagre koa se ta penage jabu dujo ge tsankon dabo. Ani tudu ge chon dabo. Me pa desa ge nolo ge me ba desa nonshin. Ta shibu junu ye mare se yerta. Sono tona chezo tende ge nesu deso ha ko wa ina tene shibu yere samba lo tuba jero. Ani te meba tang tu gires. En tegan nonshin karsego metao sedu kanga ko kechi mares, kechi kinjon do yeres. En teso hakko toaina, konzo nesu teso hakko toaina, ani tabari soya sono de nyur do gires, te sono de meba chogires. Ani da mebi kol sono tong gires. Da seya che ron chen tendeji, da chedon ko ripe she undu ye mares. Ani ngazo da yeba sanshe ne teke kale kayeres. Tega no shi mitson was, zonwa yinba zimbarwa. Tate nesu ngumala donga meta ba da me ba mitson wa tende de du. Teso yinba de yabuji soso ge lo sono to ne hakwa shigures. Te sheba ina tini tori to tu gires yer. Tat tesol temba gosana tesol sono ton tesol la yon ta shigures. Ani tende ge sono metaba yinba tomba ni yinba mitson wa yinba donga yinba so tende sono matomba ina tene taba resan, da yeba resan, soma resan, dewa resan, shinji log tawa te ta shene, ene ti gone ta ngaronso kanga chawa zoko gires. Tende indu, ta teso kol sono tonji te kachibu res, te lando gir.
So, moving on to the next verse, it's going to continue talking about these two kinds of views. But first, starting with the first one, the worldly authentic view, sort of expanding that and giving more detail about how to put this into practice here in verse 48. So it reads, "Know this truth, that men are ever sad, impermanent, devoid of self, impure. Those who do not have close mindfulness, their view 4 times inverted, head for ruin." So that's what it says. And what does this mean? Well, basically, it's inviting that we should check for ourselves in our lives. What do we really experience? Is it mostly bliss or is it mostly suffering, problems? Actually, if you really think about it, all of us have problems. And samsara, this existence, is full of suffering. So it's sometimes likened to a prison or a burning house, a place that's on fire. And it said that there's no fun at all. There's no real happiness in samsara. And if you think about it, if you really know this, then you'll be able to dispel a lot of the problematic states of mind that we normally have. And how we should think is that everything is impermanent. Everything changes moment by moment. It has this momentary nature. If you know this, then the thought of things being permanent will become less powerful. And then we also have this thought regarding ourselves, that there's a real self there, that there's an I which exists as something independent. But if we investigate this, then we find that there is no such self. And then further, when it comes to impure, it's talking about how we normally think that things, we, our body, are pure or clean, let's say. But this is not really the case if we really investigate it. So what we have to do is to think about this really carefully. And if you do think about this really carefully, and if you have continuous mindfulness about this, then this will lead you to take rebirth in higher realms. So again and again, we bring this to mind with mindfulness. If we don't, then not thinking that things are impermanent, that they are empty of self, and that they are painful, and that they are impure, will think of the opposite. Will think that things are permanent, that they last forever, that they have a real essence, that they have a real self, and that they are pure, and that they are blissful, right? And then that's going to lead to a really terrible result, because it's not reality.
Shezon ta te indu roa karse kurugo. Nazo koal shia nembate lehi gone shunwares. Le migewade nyemo dadun zimbane shunwares. Shezon ta te indu ene da mebal da yeba sam metabala tabasam soa dongala dewa sam mezon wala zongwan zetene shedewa ina teni karse kuruta koala koa kosun koa ne tayi koka desu ungi maris. Ane pemisi soso ki la chong hiboji poga baris. Chezonta tende indu deso la siris zone toshe tawne ane nyalen shiju deso yon nengo chogindu seleta luduki la shebarawa jabo deshe zombole te jene ngaron sola yo la ye bare ngaron so deso kol son tongu gere kasna ngazo ki diluted mind ki zole ani kanga de chondo yera tan koal kanga choza ki jutso de noto diluted mind de yi se yero shezo ta deso kol sono yabo ton she shewa ina te noto de mewa cha noto mena ani koal ndo megi leso megi kale ka megi tuba je megi ba ta nesu mombo 야보 초이와 드네기 단돌 현도 예사로.
So here, we should also note that samsara comes from karma. It is from karma and our negative emotions that samsara arises. In other words, this thinking that something which is impermanent is permanent, thinking that something which is painful is pleasurable, thinking that something that has no self has a self, and thinking that something which is impure is pure. This kind of thinking, this kind of misperception will lead us to continue to circle in samsara and experience really terrible pains and sufferings. So Nagajuna's advice here to the king is you have to really take this seriously, really pay attention to it, and check for yourself. And indirectly, this advice applies to all of us as well. And if we do this, if we investigate for ourselves, and then we keep in mind what the real state of things is, we'll get rid of our negative concepts, our mistaken conceptual thinking. And with those gone, with those out of the way, then so many of our other problems and all of our other sort of struggles in samsara, they will also disappear.
다단단데 지제 이게 주 셰그바 아동 나지바 대소 닌케 미사셰네 치기 다음에 봐도 공사그 다음에 비거데 해예사레 치팀바 거바데 미사셰네 애니 해예바 된데지레셔 zune dama yihi sunte da zudon deme zula danemin dala zuminete teginto pumbo rama yenyo tondo jise la yero tandegi tombo konzo gi da seyaji ta ribeshe shewa ina ta ye mare se yere konzo gi da seyate konzo gi da seyate 나론 속에 풍봉가 예로 5 gigits 예로다 대소 미유 낸던 로션에 아니 나세야지 예레선에 다 들으셔야 될 예로 저는 다들 입에 떡이 셰와이나 에 데이터 예 말이스 로그파 고고바지 론린두스 다들 해예리 셰존테인도 동보 Zulayon da seyadiye maris pumbo nga kinola zu. Zu ne da maise zu te da maris le soje jonendeki sun yeris. Ta tenri gindo la soba teso nole. Toni tensa gindo teso heshi teso non sun yeris. Zu ne da mais. Jonse kasina kasi zu te da ina. Ani da mombo yegwe chagiris zu de mombo yerewa ta tendre ribe shiyere shezon ta te maris hiyeres zu da mai hisunde da zu do de mais yo mi gi ngola kamo yeba no shene da de zu la dembi tsuji gone rongi dembe treba yeres na te ye maris yo mite kombal neba no shene da de zu la ne yeres na tende nebi gone yo rongi tuba ji ye maris shezonta tende indu teso kol sono ton shebaina ane pumbo teso la tene da se rongi tuba dendre tuba ji yesa maris te ungi mundus ribe shena seme tugi mundus shezonta da nga se de mindu se ye da nga se de kasi ye na tanda heba no she shi ye gu re se ripe za undu ani da mindu she da pumbo la ripe za ne da mani ba no she de ni pumbo lama yebo soyi pumbo do doji ji pun doji ji pumbo do naba ki pumbo te so la te ga rong she wa na ani da da se ye ji mare she ta konzo ga da me ba omba ni ba tende ha ko wa shi gu re se ta tende ke ji she so wa yin ba re.
Then now, verse 49 and 50 speak about non-self, the absence of self in both individuals and in phenomena. And so verse 49 reads, "Form is not the self," the Buddha taught, "and self does not have form, nor dwell in form. While form dwells not in self, thus you must see, the four remaining aggregates are empty too." So here, the verse is speaking about the self of the individual, of the person. And it's saying that if we investigate this with reasoning, if we use logic here, then it actually cannot be found. We have to conclude that there is no self of the individual. And here, what we're investigating is the five aggregates, because it's with reference to the five aggregates that we think I. That's what we think the self is, basically. But if we investigate, there actually is no I there to be found. It's a designation made by our mind. So the verse says that form is not the self, Buddha taught. The Buddha said in the sutras on dependent origination and in the sutras that teach emptiness that form is not the self. Why is that? Because if it were, then the self would have to become many. It would have to become multiple, since there are many forms. There are many things that go under the category of form. So it can't be. It's not. Then it says, "And self does not have form." It doesn't possess form. It's not as if the self wears the hat of form on its head. So there's not this kind of relationship either between possessor and possessed, that there's a real self which possesses form. And then it goes on, "Nor dwell in form." So the self does not exist within form in some way either. So then, and then form also does not dwell in the self, right? So the opposite is also true. So thinking about these points, bringing these to mind, the idea of a real self, a really existing self or I, somewhere, with reference to the five aggregates within or outside or something like that, it just doesn't hold up. We cannot find it with reasoning and with logic. And so we have to conclude that it doesn't exist. And so the same analysis that we applied to the form aggregate, we can also apply to the rest of the aggregates of feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. They are also empty. That's how we have to understand them. So that's the message of the verse.
Dembe tuba ye mare sele jase chimbo hiologi shenju liu gubi nole he tabu to ne he yero karsidu ta ta she tangiro kuzuk dado pumbo ni ngojire tadere kareresene ta ngojire lana tene pumbo de mombo yedu dade mombo yeguru senrabo ta ngo tade ina tene yo ko shen hemba ji yero ta le ginda ko sonen debu ginda ko nyongo yanrabo a choron ngodo papa de so do ta no she kawal ta she tona en konzak da seji ta tugi meba hejiro ta shezon shira leunda boji yabo hako shene ti ki tendol sono ton shene ani da me pare konzak da me pare se ki tendo de la ngi da boji le shene ani tel gan ja tende shene ani da de milo de nyur nyur ndone ani da me toba lo de yar yar ndone ta tende shene ta karzo ko taba togu ke janda boji ro tan de su ta cheburo.
So therefore, the conclusion is that this self of the individual is not truly established. And this is taught in great detail by Shantideva in chapter 9 of his Bodhicharya Avatara. And for example, he talks about how they cannot be of one essence, because then the self would have to be many, as we mentioned, right? And they can also not be of a distinct essence, because then they would have to be completely separate, the self and, let's say, one of the aggregates. And then it follows that they cannot be causally connected, like how one person cannot experience another's karma, and so forth. So there's a lot of very detailed reasoning, and we can, by studying these texts, we can gain real certainty in what selflessness means, the selflessness of the individual and the selflessness of phenomena. If we study these texts, like the 9th chapter of the Bodhicharya Avatara, and if we gain this kind of certainty, our self-grasping will decrease, and then eventually we'll be able to give rise to real, authentic wisdom. So this is a very important point, actually.
Ten du penata tandande ndo do ngo ni yedu ndo ki ko de ye go ne he ye ro ta pena ndo ka sula nga to son je na che ge da me ba konzo ga da me ba te zo ha ko she she ne ani ko pon le danzi pon she ne ani nga to son je gu ye ra yo ngo ka su gin do ro ngo ka su pena nyemo te so yi su ju she ne 소소 라이 선생네 아니 나기나 라촌네 에노 소제 차구 게제키 예라 따테 카가 초예로 그래서 근데 이번 인도 그 거네 히로 하무고게 뭐 데제 하 공게 뭐 녀리 시den긴다고 근데 이나 단디 깨전데서 안조 고운도 데제 깔레 카보 초리 닌가 예리.
So another point is that in our tradition, we have both sutra and tantra. And here it's very important. So this is a sutric discussion. The sutra path has to be kind of the basis. And in the sutra teachings, it says that if you want to reach Buddhahood, then you have to realize the two kinds of selflessness, and by that abandon self-grasping and negative emotions. This wisdom will uproot the negative emotions and so forth. Whereas in Tantra, we speak about transforming negative emotions into wisdom and meditating on ourselves as a deity and so forth. But these practices are not easy to understand. And if you don't know sutra first, then Tantra can be confusing. It'll be difficult to understand, and it can even be dangerous to try to practice it.
Tenda imba indu ngima ngaro sono kogin durwa. Na ngima jamen jin rodu ganga kornda ji shene any miji ngazo toni korte te hebarwa. Any miji gita ko semba tobo juni mundu segindu ta next morning la. Any tanda ki kesu ko ngal nyole shinge. Tugu ujing roma jirindo ngal kor ma dondo kor jon mundu wa. Any ko semba masheba cha shene. Ani ta ko ha ko mundu la ne tende shunso ta de kar sidu ko ngak ko ma don dog ko te ha ko mundu wa shazan ko shock cha so te indu de so te ka bo yesare.
So this is something that I thought about before. Previously, one point, I went to Germany and I had a talk there about meditation and practice. And so it was basically speaking about emptiness. And there was one person who, the day after the teachings, was very unhappy. And it seems that he was a student of Chogyam Rinpoche, and he had studied mostly Tantra, mostly Tantric teachings, but he didn't really know that much about Sutra. So then hearing the Sutra teachings, he was kind of shocked and not very happy with it. And this doesn't seem very ideal. That's not such a good situation to be in.
Karsana ta ko ge kan guji mundu se ta kanga tomba ni rindu se te nga chiba zona choka yerinda wonde song do lagin do ko.
Because he was saying things like, oh, but this doesn't make any sense. If everything is just emptiness, then it doesn't matter what I do or anything like that, you know?
Te indu ta uman juba te so non lagin do toni ge ko hesa ge mete seno konsa so chachu ji ingu gres. Loson toni ge ko de kaju maju hena ndigi mare tela nipa yeri se lagi yerwa. Toni ko hesa de lojon yabo yenken. Toni karse kol keja nyea la seno yenken rabo hojo yenken rabo de iguri se lagi do tiso is nengorin do.
So, actually, in the Madhyamaka Avatara, the entrance to the middle way, it talks about how if you want to teach about emptiness, then the person you're teaching to, they have to fulfill certain requirements. They have to be qualified to hear about it. And it's said that it's wrong to immediately teach emptiness to someone who is not prepared properly. So, for example, it has to be someone who has studied well and who is interested in hearing these teachings. So, this is a very important point, actually.
Shizonta konzog da de ye mare sedu umage riba chimbo nga de he taje tone any konzog da ye mare chi da ye mare sene ta ludu don dawa dawa tsu ki he yero ta te ko ya bu ji chane ti ko la sono ton she de waina tini ngune konzo se de mundu ta dembe to ba mundu se ge ngi he da wo ji tende ko le ya ye de ya ji ji ton re sha ro ta ina yo te lo son ngi mare.
So, this point that the self of the individual doesn't actually exist is something that is explained and proven actually with the five great reasonings of the Madhyamaka tradition by masters like Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. And it's possible that if we really take this to heart, if we study these reasonings and these texts very well, we can reach a certainty about this and really come to understand how it is that the self doesn't exist. But it doesn't happen just like that. It doesn't happen immediately.
Tachidong ko ndo teke sanla emphasis chile nyolin shi yiris. Nga teke lula emphasis chile nyolin shi yaji chow yiris. Ten dongo ke chepan rabu tende gone he yirwa.
In general, we can say that in Sutra, the emphasis is on the mind. And in Tantra, the emphasis becomes one of the body. So this is one way we can explain the difference between Sutra and Tantra.
Ta tije nga ju pa ki chi ki dami bi kote he yindwa. Pumbu ndeja leme, du lemen, rongi leme, ngo nyi lemen, onshu leme, jome, jime de, miki le no si le shurin zes. Tang koa di kande shene shunri se la yero, ta tanda ngumala, chi se nang koa te so la yero. Sedu ta ti ki len da buchi, tande shiro mutipa te so gilana, kase rugo. Ta dao se ya, ta ki chidong te so karse go, so so jukin meba la, tega tse ma nongka ne ma, a unzi nongshi, pumbo la soba te so lo rao ma lebi go ne, eni dao se ya ji yeri se ya nra wotende higira, ten nomba ki tende higi ma res. Yon mudi tongji ba la soba ta pachi tende insar kake ki du taba se ya ji ten shene yon kowa ten dugiri se la giro wa, teo ma res. Eni zo rongi sengi ji la tenne kowa sen dugiri se tongji ba te so higira, teo ma res. Eni ko jume jime li peja maji ki don nonshin, ta tende o ma res. Tene la onshu chimbo ki shega wa ji o ma res. Ene ko jume bi gone shuga wa so tende o ma res. Ona kanderes na kowa se ya de, ta kondi huba nonshin kowa se ya de, mari pa don, ene tegi gone le sa go ba. Ndona three poison te so la tene kowa se ya de tugi e ba. Tende jita jabu deji zombo chono ha kowa shi gugires. Ta dende ge kol sono ton shen shen eni kase go. Chi te so yon dembe towa mi ba ha kowa tende shi to gugires he yisar.
But now we come to verse number 50, which is addressing the selflessness of phenomena. So it reads, "The aggregates are not a simple whim. From neither time nor nature do they come, nor by themselves from God or without cause. Their source, you ought to know, is ignorance. From karmic deeds and craving have they come." So what this verse is addressing is basically, how did samsara appear? Where did it come from? It seems some non-Buddhist schools would say that the self, samsara, is something that just kind of appears on its own accord, just kind of as if it falls down from the sky, without having to depend on the aggregates. But this is not what the Buddhist school thinks. So there's no idea that time somehow, a permanent time, brings the aggregates into existence. And then I think it's probably the Samkhya school which says that there's something called prakriti, or nature, some kind of principle that evolves into the self. This is also not the position of the Buddhist schools. The aggregates do not come from themselves. They don't arise just on their own. They don't come from Ishvara, from some kind of powerful God, and they don't arise without a cause either. And so, how do they come about? Well, samsara comes from ignorance, and karma. And then basically from that, then there comes this craving. So we can say that samsara arises from the three poisons of ignorance, aversion, and craving or attachment. So Nagarjuna says, "O king, this is what you have to know. This is how phenomena are. Phenomena are not truly established."
Atje ngaju ngaji ba deke ngazo kosun ko andela munte ne donga nyone dede goya de condition ne chaba resele tiwanda bujile du ani teiki lendula ko ala munte ne de junkin ge kunjur sun seyachi tatende ge junda mura sun hiya yeres teso ngote shi yis tende la yesare tsuren tugu chonzi ronlu la shinji loba tado tesante kundu jowa desu tabayi tongje gongi labar chimban zes. Ta koale de chunkin ji de tsuren tugu chonzi seyaji yeri labari. De koala de chunkin chinkin yon juchi res. De karse du ta shinji loba til seyeri ta. Taba toji lang mayi bala lang yinban rabo ji lang shene ta. Pena shiro muti banga ke me sabu kongle chongya shene rabo. Ani lula tsemo tang ta teso diba tagiri, ani taba togiri shene rabo. Tende ki sono teso nesu do mantung baji yinza, ani teso ta gabo she tende shene, ani teso koala de chugiris. En koala donga nyo chushise tende chi chogiris. Tani ronu la shinjilo tawa sayate njital koyiri, njita saya jero, njita sedu pumbo la miyu ngen do tone, eni te la daye ba tawa shibate. Ngune shena ta kondu ko konzak dado chiki daye masonwa, ina ta yeba tawa te hiyon koala dewa shigiris. Tani tesan sedu, te soje gihe gojo taba toji gi ju lam dong, ani te nyalen shene taba nebu teso yena mena sonne ta tesan shera. Tende deki yon koala de chugiris. Te tabi nomba sumbu te la koala kundu jonkin koala de chunkin yindu kunjun sunse la giris, kunjun sunse. Teso tili taba newana sojiji kompu toba la ani kei pache shinkin teris. Go no shin longa nendo machu le ka gonki tende res. Te yinba de ta jabu chono hakowa shikugiris. Na te tate xie songa re.
So here, now moving on to verse 51, we might have this question of how did we come to wander in the three realms of samsara to begin with? We might have that kind of question. So this next verse addresses and points out three things that make us continue to wander in samsara. And these are called the three originations. And the verse reads, to feel that one is ethically superior, to view one's body wrongly, and to doubt. With these three fetters, you should understand. The way through freedom's city gates is blocked. So the first of these then, to feel that one is ethically superior, this refers to a certain kind of wrong view, which is holding discipline as superior, or holding a certain ascetic practice as being superior. This is something that will bind us in samsara, that will make us continue to wander in samsara, because it's a mistaken approach. It essentially amounts to thinking that a path that doesn't lead to freedom and omniscience does in fact lead there. For example, then, like certain non-Buddhist schools think that if we simply jump into a very hot fire or do some other kind of physically very difficult thing, then this will kind of lead us to freedom. This will liberate us. But this is actually mistaken. And instead of freeing us, it will make us just continue to wander and suffer within samsara. Then we have this to view one's body wrongly. And this is the view of the transitory collection. So actually, this is kind of what we discussed just now, that when it talks about the body, then it's looking at the aggregates and thinking that they are a real self. Having that kind of idea will make us wander in samsara. So then the last is doubt, having doubt about the truth, about whether all of these things really are problems or not, or selflessness, is it real or not, and so forth. This is also going to kind of impel us to further wandering in samsara. So therefore, these three are taught to be the three fetters that hinder us from getting to nirvana, to get through to the city of freedom, because they're essentially like a locked door, a closed gate that we can't pass through. So Nagajuna says, O king, you must know these three fetters.
Tangaji ngoni pa teke tene ngazo taba toguna ti taba de mudi ba glava nonshin la tsomba do jajing do onshu sengi tesu ngedo nowa nonshin shine ta tene dabo taba de te goya jing goya meba imba taba seya mocha seya de soso ge bezen shine ani to toba ji do sonje toba ji zoguye ba imba ta tene ke tesu ye ba tene re shate indu taba dola rolendela ni yinji toje je manji pe te don tsuren sonde denba yi denba nomba yila beban zesene taba dola rolendela sidu ta nomba soje ba gi sozo taba se la yerwa sozo taba se du sozo ge kanga jane lega shene any call tane any da jambi kompunda bo ta soje kompunda bo de togu resele de la yerwa ta oda tere mado ye jila roran tse shene any taba to yana tende keje de heyi maris ta sozo la role de yeris ta zo chi on de shene tini taba toje ki tenda bote ta jeja demba gigi kesa ki sumra nda botende tipa lojon she Tene mege kyo ponga wage tsurin rabu sum. Tene toni ki kon rabu la sen mipa tseji dute gan rabu ja. Ta tende shewa ina teso ki taba toya la pen tagi res. Ta jen chawaya na mado taba toji ki ju nge ju de soso ro le res. Tene denpa nomba gibo te donga denpa, kunju denpa, gobi denpa, lonji denpa teso ki nelu. Ta donga denpa meta donga tong dami sen rabu teso la sono tong she. Ani teso le teze nyolin rabu she shewa ina. Teso ki yon taba toya, koya le taya la ta pendo shi ire. En teso ko jabu chono haa ko gugure. En teso nyolin shi toya la bejan yon shi gurus. Di keje te xebare.
Now, moving on to verse number 52. This verse talks about how if we want to achieve freedom, then that kind of freedom, in the Buddhist tradition, it's not held that, like some non-Buddhists say, freedom is something that is given by gods like Vishnu, Maheshwara, or Shakra, but rather it comes from our own effort. It depends on us. And so the verse reads, freedom will depend on you alone, and there is no one else, no friend can help. So bring endeavor to the Four Noble Truths with study, discipline, and concentration. It says here, freedom will depend on you alone. In the Buddhist tradition, we speak about individual liberation, meaning that one individual for themselves attains the level of arhathood or Buddhahood. And there is no one else, no friend can help. There's no one else that can help you with this. No one is going to make you attain freedom. No one can give it to you. You have to work hard on it yourself. So then what we talk about as conditions are study, discipline, and concentration. So studying the real state of the Four Truths, the Four Noble Truths, keeping the discipline of refraining from committing the 10 non-virtuous actions, and then concentration, meditating one-pointedly on emptiness and selflessness. These will benefit us in trying to gain our freedom. So they're taught as conditions, but the actual cause is from ourselves. So then, thinking about this nature, the true state of the Four Noble Truths, thinking about impermanence, suffering, and selflessness or emptiness, these are going to help you, O King. So you should be very diligent in practicing these.
Taba toba shibiki juteso do dudu shene sheba ina ani ndamra sonyere laba sonse jiris tadi kejete so hegindwa labi tsurin labi heraton labi senla todo labaji laba jaza ngaju lajine sumbo ndenyo yondo ndoan jurus sedu ta ngazo taba sojiji kompunda bo toguna tigi ju teso tsundo dudu shena sonres jeja hlapa son se jiris sura dene son la tene jeja hlapa son se ji ta hieris laba tsurenji laba heraji laba tengenzenji laba se 다 라바 쓰는지 라바 세야데 미게 교본 라스발 뇽리 시야데 시게로와 라바 헤라지 라바세도 다메 베콜 다 소노톤네 다메 또 빌로 헤란다 보던데 뇽리 시바 데 라바 땡기드세도 요 템바 냐와가 바 길라스바 감네 다 텐데 시야데소 다 대소 순근로라 다바 토지기 죽간간 두데 예레스 플라 세두 대소 순레 허바 기 다바 토지기 죽 넘바 소제 발 히야예 마레스 요나 플라 세야데 시로 무디파 대소레 아니 레버레시 쳐야라 주 허바지 넘발 히야지 예바 인상 아니 허반다고 데 라기레스 다 친디잖아 최선 다데 인도 라바스음보들라 투타도 아니 자보데지 좀보처럼 lalip tubado nyolishi tubate shigugres tene ge tsolo gesu gelo se anduri ni janga ju tasun la sabatende he yeres chido takarse hlama chusun tuji sunju senda bodatende yerwa teso yo pa shidon ondu shene he gor madu chu du she go wa ina teso ganga yo laba sumbundi kondolon do de yeres laba de laba chrenji laba se ti kondu de yebares teso hakwa shigures labar
Verse number 53 speaks about the causes for obtaining freedom, being the three higher trainings. And the verse reads, "Train always in superior discipline, superior wisdom, and superior mind." Monks' vows exceed 105 tenths, yet they are all included in these three. If we want to attain Buddhahood, the causes are these three, the three higher trainings, which are based on the three pitakas, the three baskets of the Buddha's teachings. And here, the higher training in discipline amounts to abandoning the 10 non-virtues, not committing the 10 non-virtuous actions. The higher training of wisdom refers to contemplating and understanding selflessness, this mind which understands selflessness. And meditation, this refers to then the higher training in meditation refers to practicing the 4 close applications of mindfulness. And within these 3, the cause for attaining freedom is complete. It's not like the non-Buddhists say that freedom comes from something outside, something external to us, something sort of beyond our own control or effort. And so that's why it's called a superior training or a higher training, because it's superior to or higher than the non-Buddhist ideas of how to attain liberation. And then the second half of the verse talks about the vows of a bhikshu, a fully ordained Buddhist monk. Nija nishuta sonrwa
re nijanga jitas
lasa. And there are 253 vows of a fully ordained monk. And there are many sort of secondary vows and branch vows and root vows and so forth. But all of them can be condensed into these 3. And especially then, you can condense all of the monk's vows into the higher training of discipline.
kezo tate indu ngazo nomba soji biglo sola jeji dene sum, sura dene sum, jeja lan lapa sum se he yirwa. Shezon te indu, ndui gi dene te la tene, ane lapa tsurinji lapa se de le ungiris. Ngenba gi dene te la ten shene, lapa heraj lapa se de li yiris. Ndote gi dene te la ten shene, ane lapa tenginzi lapa se de ungi yiris. O tende nanju he yiri. Teso hakona yaburo yiri.
So we can also add here that in Buddhism, we talk about these three pitakas, the three baskets, and they are related to the three higher trainings. And how is this? Well, the three baskets, we have the Vinaya basket on the monk's vows, right? And there we find the source for the higher training of discipline. In the Abhidharma Pitaka, we find the source for the higher training in wisdom. And in the Sutra Pitaka, we find the source for the teachings on the higher training in meditation.
Te indu ta, ngazo tonje chimbala shonsa lo se tenenda wola undu, pesha teso kungo la, eni teke jeja ji ondu shewa ina, laba tsurinji laba de he yiris, jeje ji ondu shewa ina, eni ndui ki dene ki keja de he un yiris. Eni soje to shonshu sembala shonsa lo se je ena pesha chi la, eni jeje de ndodi dene ris, jeja de laba tengiz laba de he yiris. Ani jamba yenu jubala shonsa lo se la ona, jeji de ngembi de ne chogiris, jeja de ani laba heraji laba de hesa yimba tende so ta kowa jene shine hakugaji chogiris.
So we can understand actually the topic of a particular text that we are about to read by looking at the homage in the beginning. If it says homage to the omniscient one, to the all-knowing one, that is Vinaya text. If it says homage to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, then it belongs to the Sutra Pitaka. And if it's prefaced by a homage to Manjushri, homage to the youthful Manjushri, then this means that the text belongs to the Abhidharma Pitaka.
Oda tende res ro. Teni ta tama de nga zo lesen tama de nga ju nga yi pa ro. Nga ju nga yi pa de he ta temba de dabu jegu de nengo yimba. Temba nyo so ina. Ani 저 뭐 포기해 봐. 니바 뭐 중기해 봐. 다 드네게 되지 얘긴도와 온슈 루도 템바 데히기. 데바 집빌런도 니와테. 데니 드네 니바 숨지테. 템바 냠베 치군 지반 주로스네. 다 온슈세도 잡을 라바레 미. 잡을 온슈세 라고야 되다. 조노론셰 온통 히보 예비 준세 고네 온슈세 미 따바리다. 루드기 잡을라. 아니 잡을 처럼을 가르라라도 저런 가두이나 다 템바 녀고 돼서 녀리시아도 아니 산라 템바 예바시주데 히로기 내가 저기 레스이다 다들라 예르다 공도 라파스 녀리시아지 해서 라파스 녀리시발라 템바 예 구지데 히로기 내가 저기 레스 템바데 예나 아니 타바토발라 레라보 저기 레스 제도 템바세야 돼 대바지 밸런스야 돼 이바 소지 주는 데 히에레스 대인도 자자 페 존에 데네라도 자자 셴네 tembaje manyaba sun tuba shi jute nengo res. Te nengo ibi junse kasana temba de nya suna ene gewi gi che kanga soso tsala meba don ene soso ge nyone shimu tuba chogi res. Shezan ta ene temba de karele tegurula na ene lu mitaba yinba chowa dung hawa yinba danda lu mitongwa yinba chowa dung hawa yinba sen mitaba yinba chi da mi ba yinba kol teso la ene temba manyawa shene ta tende shene chigugi res tikaje de lavar.
Now, verse number 54 talks about how mindfulness is something that's extremely important to maintain at all times. And if our mindfulness degenerates, if we lose our mindfulness, then this is something very negative. So the verse reads, "My Lord, the Buddha taught close mindfulness of body as the single path to tread. Hold fast and guard it well, for all the Dharma is destroyed by loss of mindfulness." So the reason, well, this address in the beginning, "My Lord," it refers to the king. And the reason Nagarjuna is addressing him in this way is because the king owns a lot of possessions and he has a great deal of power. Therefore, he's addressed as a lord. And so he says, "O king, the close application of mindfulness is something that you have to practice. It's very important. When we speak about these three higher trainings, having mindfulness is really like a crucial factor. It's like the foundation. If you do have mindfulness, then actually attaining freedom, liberation will be easy. So the task then is to be extremely careful to make sure that one doesn't lose this mindfulness. If we lose it, then along with losing our mindfulness, we'll also lose all of our virtuous practice. We won't be able to do any practice and we'll lose our merit. So what we have to be mindful of then, or what Nagarjuna is advising the king to be mindful of, is that the body is impure, feelings are painful, the mind is impermanent, and phenomena are empty. This is what we have to be mindful of.
Ola su ta tiri tegala goya re.
So
Tini suma
that's
che tuze yero wa.
Lazala, laya,
Eni nga zo za nima tuze jiba ta ne tega rong re.
Lazala. So this was the last verse for today's session, and we'll meet again next Sunday, same time. So now I think we have some time for questions as well, if you have any.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. do. So the question is, I think the confusion is samsara arose when appearances were not recognized as the empty, luminous display of awareness, and were instead grasped as truly existing self and other. But at the same time, samsara was there since beginningless time. How can one deepen this seemingly contradiction of beginningless samsara, I guess, and arising of ignorance?
Sagar lagindu.
Sungidurwa, nye samna, chulpa, gotsuksa rabade, korwa gotsuksa rabade, tene nangwa, Um,
마더비 돈에.
nang watin so tirwa matopet gone onre nang watin so toni tang wesel ki korang rikpe ki tsal toni tang wesel wadi
다데
ngwe
ngagluso
madines
re, ngagluso.
lasa lasa
때 ngagluso re, ngagluso shena tega rong res. Tanda nga zon den doi ke ja kigidoa.
oh lasa lasa yes, yes, you're totally correct. But this is actually a tantric perspective on how this all happened. But right now we're discussing the sutra tradition. So, Kempela, I have a question.
네.
So sometimes in these teachings, it talks about we shouldn't spend too much time with non-virtuous friends. So
음.
basically, yeah. But then, um, for me, for example, I grew up having, well, basically all of my friends from my childhood and from my country are non-Buddhists. So from one perspective, you could say that they're non-virtuous friends, but I think it would be difficult to kind of completely stop spending time with them. So how can one like balance that?
레레 다땡이 하고서 때 difficult 레 이나라와 아지 델라 예사레 미지도 찰론네 애니 거기 제네 nye momba cherenro shidong cherenro kontro cherenro ngajo cherenro tende zonki mitende yena teso gi chalandro ya mare bige puzo grese shidong cheba mai bigi chalandro ya ye mare ndibo shia ye mase te la yesa mare.
Lazo. So Campbell's answer to my question was actually the kind of person that we should avoid spending time with is someone who makes our afflictions stronger. If we notice that when we spend time with a certain person, we have more anger, more negativities, and so forth, and that's maybe someone to avoid. That's maybe how one can approach it in a balanced way.
다 파마 이나요 소소 질란데죠 레바 알라 진zon기 히돈 레발라 진zon기 이나 애니 파마 이나 ndibo shia ye mare se yesarwa
And
내 파마
so,
데 디비 trobo chogierwa.
Laza, even if they're your parents, actually, if you find that being with them makes desire and anger grow stronger in your mind, then you shouldn't be too close, basically. You shouldn't stay too close. Even though they are your parents, essentially, they are non-virtuous friends, basically.
되네 다
Tene pachingzo samshasare,
라서 드니 야보 스리송 다 페이토
lasa,
예미 레와예 아니
lasa,
제만자우
lasa. Okay, so that'll be it for today. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope this was helpful and meaningful for you.
Thank you very much again, Kempola and Olaf. Excellent teachings. Thank you again so much. And everyone
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kempula,
Thank
and
you. Thank you.
have a wonderful
next time.
Sunday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You too. Bye bye.